Corkscrew Theatre Company presents The Portrait, adapted by Sophie McMahon from an original story by Nikolai Gogol. The stage play was first performed at the Cambridge Drama Festival in 2019, and the company had planned to perform the show in aid of the Red Hen Project, a Cambridge charity supporting vulnerable children and their families.
Nowhere did so many people pause as before the little picture shop in the Stukinui Dvor. At the time our story begins, the young painter Tchartkoff paused involuntarily as he passed the shop. His old jacket and plain attire showed him to be a man who was devoted to his art with self-denying zeal, and who had no time to trouble himself about his clothes. He halted in front of the little shop and at first enjoyed an inward laugh over the monstrosities in the shape of pictures. It seemed to him that every painting had the same colours, the same manner, the same practised hand.
They may as well have been churned out by a machine than painted by a man.
Please, respect the convention of this story, Tchartkoff. I am the storyteller. You are part of the story. Don't interrupt me again. Meanwhile, the proprietor of the shop, a pushy little man with a beard which had not been shaved since Sunday, had been urging him to buy for some time.
Here, I'll take a silver piece for this little landscape. What a painting! I only just received from the factory. The varnish isn't dry yet. Oh, here's a winter scene. Take the winter scene. 15 ruples. The frame alone is worth it. What a winter scene. I'll have them sent to your house. Where do you live?
Hold, not so fast. Let me have a look. Although I doubt if there is anything I want here.
Tchartkoff did not expect to find anything of interest in this shop. The window was adorned with flashy, faddish designs. The most prized paintings, seen by nearly everyone as highly fashionable, were garish and repellent to our artist. He stumbled past oddly posed figurines and handmade trinkets in the poorest of taste, until he came to a large pile of discarded canvases, hidden away in the back corner and clearly not on display. Rifling through these forgotten paintings, Tchartkoff laid his hands on something he deemed to be remarkable.
Perhaps I may have come across something.
He had heard stories about pictures of the great masters having been found among the rubbish in cheap print sellers' shops.
Well, my friend, have you chosen anything?
The painter had been standing motionless for some time before a portrait of an old man. Very definitely an old man, and yet somehow ageless and timeless and enticing. Dusty and defaced as the portrait was, Tchartkoff saw, when he had succeeded in removing the dirt from the face, traces of the work of a great artist.
How much is this one?
Give me 75 kopecks.
I can't.
Well, how much will you give?
20 kopecks?
What a price! Why, you couldn't buy the frame for that.
Unable to offer anything more, Tchartkoff turned to leave.
Sir, turn back. Add 10 kopecks. Take it. Give me 20 kopecks. To tell the truth, you are my only customer today.
Thus, Tchartkoff quite unexpectedly became the purchaser of the portrait.
Oh, what the hell have I done? My last 20 kopecks.
He went home to his studio, a large room, but low, and fitted up with all sorts of artists' rubbish. Plaster hands, canvases, sketches begun and discarded, and draperies thrown over chairs. He placed the portrait he had just purchased on a large wooden easel and slumped into his armchair, happy to take the weight off his weary feet. After taking a swig from a cold cup of tea that had been awaiting his return all day, Tchartkoff's eyes fell upon a letter lying on the mat by his door.
Your rent is late for the 3rd month in a row. I will stand for this no longer.
And will be calling in the morning to collect the full sum you owe. If you fail to make payment, you will be evicted. Regards, landlord.
Ha! Let him come.
With no money and no idea what he would do when the landlord called in the morning, Tchartkoff tried to remember the wisdom of his old professors from art school.
Look here, my friend. You have talent. It will be a shame if you waste it, but you are impatient. See to it that you do not become a fashionable artist. At present, your colouring begins to assert itself too loudly, and your drawing is at times quite weak. You are already striving after the fashionable style. Have some care. It is seductive to paint fashionable little pictures and portraits for money, but talent is ruined, not developed by that means. Be patient. Think out every piece of work. Discard your foppishness. Let others amass money, and you will gain worth of an entirely different kind.
The professor was partly right. Our artist sometimes wanted to enjoy himself, to play the fop. In short, to give vent to his youthful impulses in some way or other. But he could control himself, for the most part. But when dire want arrived, when he had no money to buy brushes or colours, when his landlord came 10 times a day to demand the rent for his room, then did the luck of those artists who painted in the fashionable style and received handsome rewards for their inferior work recur to his hungry imagination. And now he was almost in this frame of mind.
Yes, it is all very well to be patient, to stay true to myself, to be patient. But what money have I to buy dinner with tomorrow? Even if I brought myself to sell all my pictures and sketches, they would not give me 20 kopecks for the whole lot.
Considering what he could possibly sell to come up with the money in such a short space of time, Tchartkoff cast his eye over the contents of his humble rooms. Unfinished works, a dozen half-filled sketchbooks, specialised artist pencils and brushes that were invaluable to him, but mere junk to the common man. Dribbling pots of paint covered the floor, and used plates and mugs scattered the surfaces. He sighed, turned, and surveyed the results of his life's work thus far. But then the artist suddenly shuddered and turned pale. A convulsively distorted face gazed at him. Peeping forth from the surrounding canvas, 2 terrible eyes were fixed straight upon him. It was the portrait he had bought, and which he had quite forgotten about.
It looks with human eyes, living human eyes, like they've been cut out from a living man and inserted.
Now, it is my job as storyteller to step in here and give a little context as to why this strange old portrait seems so disturbing. It was actually painted by my great-great-uncle, a self-taught artist, not well known but a true master of his craft. Anyway, that is not why this painting is special. It is the subject of the portrait that holds its power. This man, the man in the painting, was a wealthy moneylender, rumoured to be capable of lending any sum of money to anyone who asked. But as a result, bizarre and terrible events seemed to happen to all those he did business with. Specifically, his borrowers developed qualities contrary to their previous personalities. A sober man became a drunkard. A fine young gentleman turned on his wife and began to beat her, and many came to unnaturally early deaths. So, when my great-great-uncle commissioned to paint this portrait, became unnaturally disturbed by his own work and refused to continue on, a similar fate befell him. Rage, drunkenness, and jealousy took over his life and sent him into a spiral of madness, concluding in his early death.
Stop staring at me! I feel as if you're looking into my soul! Stop! Stop! Please!
He pleaded with the portrait as if it could hear him, as though it had a mind to be merciful. It would be blatant foreshadowing to tell you now that it did not. Tchartkoff hauled a heavy sheet over the easel where the portrait was mounted in an attempt to put it both out of sight and out of mind. He went straight to bed and enjoyed just a few hours of uninterrupted slumber before he awoke suddenly to find the portrait uncovered. His heart grew cold. He watched anxiously. The old man in the portrait moved, and suddenly, supporting himself with both arms, leapt out of the frame. Footsteps resounded through the room, and the grisly figure came nearer and nearer to Tchartkoff's bed. His whimpering cries could not ward off the approaching phantom. The old man pulled out a purse. He untied it, took it by the end and shook it. Heavy bags of coins fell out with a dull thud upon the floor. Each was marked 1,000 ducats. Tchartkoff perceived one coin purse which had fallen within reaching distance. Gingerly, he reached out a shaking hand and took it for himself. Concealing it beneath his blanket, the desperate artist glanced in fear at the old man to see whether he had noticed. It was suddenly clear that the sinister figure was hunting for a missing something. He approached Tchartkoff with a chilling menace.
Ah! Was it a dream? Oh, God, please tell me that was a dream.
But the terrible reality of the apparition did not resemble a dream. Still more surprised was he to see the portrait uncovered and shifting, strangely, as if enchanted with sentience. The old man's features moved, and one skeletal hand reached out as though he wanted to drag him through the frame and into the mysterious world on the other side of the canvas.
Ah! Was that a dream?
Yes. He was lying in bed, and in precisely the position in which he had fallen asleep. The portrait was visible, covered with a sheet, as it should be. And so, was that too a dream? Once again, Tchartkoff squirmed and shivered and shook with fear as the figure from the possessed portrait morphed into a wild avenger, and once again stretched out his bony fingers in the direction of Tchartkoff's cowering body.
Oh, good Lord. What is it? What's happening?
What you've just witnessed there, dear listener, was a dream within a dream within a dream. And that is the magic of storytelling. He awoke late, and with the disagreeable feeling of a man who has been half suffocated with coal gas. His head ached painfully. It seemed as though there were something in the old man's very glance and expression which said he had been with him that night. If only he had grasped the bag more firmly, would it still have remained in his hand even after his awakening?
My God, if I only had a portion of that money.
This is my final demand for your rent. You must pay me today.
Well, how can I when I have no money? Wait and I will pay.
I can't wait, my good fellow. I say to you frankly that this is not an establishment where people do not pay their rent. Pay your money at once, please, or else clear out.
Well, what am I to pay with? That's the question. I haven't a groschen at present.
I tell you, there is no worse lodger than a painter. He lives like a pig. God have mercy!
With this exclamation, the careless and somewhat clumsy landlord flung his arms wide and thus knocked the portrait to the ground. Tchartkoff rushed to restore it to an upright position, finding underneath a coin purse, identical to that which he'd discovered in his dreams.
What's that which just fell on the floor?
What business is it of yours what's in my room?
It's my business because you ought to pay your rent. Because you have money and won't pay. That's why it's my business.
Well, I shall pay you then. I'll pay you this minute. And I will leave this room tomorrow. I will not stay with such a brute of a landlord.
Very well. I shall be glad to be rid of you.
Handling the bulging coin purse with a mix of heady excitement and utmost care, Tchartkoff mused on all the opportunities that had been gifted to him by this large sum of money.
What shall I do with all this? I could be independent for at least 3 years. I can shut myself up in my room and work. I have money for colours now, for food and lodging. No one can annoy and disturb me now. I will buy myself everything I need, and if I work 3 years to satisfy myself without haste or with the idea of selling, I shall surpass all and may become a distinguished artist.
But then another thought entered his mind, the kind of thought his wise professor had warned him against. How his heart beat when he thought of it.
To wear a fashionable coat, to feast after long abstinence, to hire handsome apartments, to go at once to the theatre, to the confectioner's, to anywhere I like.
And seizing his money, he was in the street in a moment. All his goods, everything he owned, easels, canvases, pictures, were transported that same evening to his newly purchased rooms. The next day, he took 10 ducats and went to the editor of a popular newspaper, asking his charitable assistance.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, young man. And what can I do for you?
I need your help. I need you to make me the most famous artist in the land. I need you to publish an article proclaiming my talent to the masses.
Now, you must understand that without having seen any of your work, there is no way I can publish such an article.
But, sir, I can make it worth your while. However much you ask, I will pay.
The next day, there appeared in the paper an article with the following heading: Tchartkoff's immense talent! The artist read this article with secret satisfaction. His face beamed. He was mentioned in print. It was a novelty to him. He read the article so many times that he himself began to believe that it was entirely true, and not just the result of his bribery. And seemingly out of nowhere, Tchartkoff became the most sought-after artist in 1,000 square miles. People travelled from far and wide to have a sitting with him.
You know, we came expressly that you might begin my daughter's portrait immediately.
Of course, madam. Do come in. I am ready this very moment.
Do you know, I should like her painted simply attired and seated among green shadows. Make her beautiful and refined.
This was to be a challenge, as the foppish girl didn't naturally lend herself to the kind of understated beauty her mother sought after. He began with care, as a real artist does, with plenty of observation and very little haste. Slowly, something of the young sitter began to present itself on the canvas.
It is time to stop. 3 o'clock. How late it is. We shall return to have you finished tomorrow.
Feeling dissatisfied at being made to stop mid-artistic flow, Tchartkoff laid his brush and palette on a chair and paused in irritation before the picture. This soon subsided upon remembering the large sum of money his new client had already paid in deposit. Thrusting a great many coins into his pocket, he headed out into town to see how much could be spent in a single evening.
I shall reward myself with a splendid dinner, an evening at the theatre, and a drive through the city in a carriage.
Having ticked off this sensational list of plans, Tchartkoff found himself with still more coins to spend. He headed to the smartest bar in the city and began to drink. The following morning, rather earlier than Tchartkoff would have liked...
Sit down, dear. We've only got a couple of hours to get this completed.
With a head still banging from his exploits the night before, our artist picked up his brush and started to paint, slowly, and with as much precision as his slightly shaking hand would allow. After a few hours, the painting was complete. He presented it to his new client with pride.
My goodness! Why have you painted her so plain and sallow? I asked you to paint her beautiful.
Sadly, Tchartkoff began to erase what his brush had put upon the canvas, removing the uniqueness and artistry from his work. He produced her a fashionable portrait, looking nothing like her daughter, but entirely fulfilling her demands. The portrait created a furore in the city. The lady exhibited it to all her friends, and all admired the skill with which the artist had preserved the likeness, and at the same time conferred more beauty on the plain girl. The artist was suddenly overwhelmed with work. It seemed as if the whole city wanted to be painted by him.
whatever he's paying, I'll double it.
I want to look like a princess!
It was the most popular, yet least satisfying work he had ever undertaken. It seemed that everyone wanted to be painted the same, regardless of what they actually looked like.
All angles should be rounded, all unevenness smoothed away, and even removed entirely if possible. And in spite of all this, they want a good likeness and an unconstrained naturalness. Even the most dismal and uninspiring of subjects insist on being painted as a hero or a great beauty.
At first, such demands threw the artist into a cold perspiration. Finally, he acquired the knack of it and never troubled himself at all about it. It was not long before he wondered why he had ever bothered with such hard work when it is far easier and more lucrative to simply please the crowds. And of course, those who sat for him were in ecstasies and proclaimed him a genius. In short, it would soon have been impossible for anyone to have recognised in him the modest artist who had formerly toiled unknown in his miserable quarters in the Vasilevsky Ostrov.
I do not understand why others toil and work with difficulty. A man who labours for months over a picture is no artist, in my opinion. I don't believe he has any talent. Genius works boldly, rapidly. I painted this gallant soldier in just 2 days, this family of aristocrats in only 1 day, this ensemble of ballerinas in a few hours, and this entire wedding party in little more than an hour. And it is widely known that I am the best artist in 1,000 miles.
It hadn't yet occurred to him that he had simply purchased his success from the unscrupulous journalist. But fame can give no pleasure to him who has stolen it, not earned it. So all his feelings and impulses turned towards wealth. Gold was his passion, his ideal, his fear, his delight, his aim. A sudden flap of the letterbox caught Tchartkoff's attention, and a single ivory envelope lured him to read its contents.
Dear Tchartkoff, as a worthy member of our body, the
Academy of Painting is writing to invite you to give your opinion on one of our new works. The painter is one of your former comrades who has been possessed with a passion for art from his earliest years, has given himself up to it with his whole soul and estranged himself from his friends and relatives. We believe that he may be the best artist in 1,000 miles. Please come and share in the delight of this masterpiece. Regards, the Academy of Painting.
He accepted the invitation with pleasure and journeyed to the Academy of Painting in an extravagant horse-drawn carriage on the appointed day. It was important to him that he showed his past professors what a success he had turned out to be. When Tchartkoff entered the room, he found a crowd of visitors already collected before the new picture. The most profound silence, such as rarely settles upon a throng of critics, reigned over all.
Oh God. Pure. Faultless. Beautiful as a bride.
The critics regarded this hitherto unknown work with a feeling of involuntary wonder. Tears stood ready to fall in the eyes of those who surrounded the picture.
Yes, to tell the truth, it is impossible to deny the artist's talent. There is something in it,
All his being, all his life had been aroused in one instant, as if youth had returned to him, as if the dying sparks of his talent blazed forth afresh. The scales suddenly fell from his eyes.
I must paint something of real worth.
Tchartkoff sped home, determined to prove to himself that he could still create art with beauty and meaning. He seized his brush and palette and thrust a fresh canvas onto the easel, ready to paint a new masterpiece. But his hand and his imagination had been too long confined to one groove, and the fruitless efforts to escape the bonds and fetters which he had imposed upon himself showed itself in irregularities and errors.
I must remove all these fashionable monstrosities from my studio. I cannot paint with them cluttering my mind. I'll not eat nor sleep until I can call myself a real artist again.
He sat, toiling like a scholar, but how pitifully wretched was all that proceeded from his hand. It was as though he had forgotten how to paint. He questioned whether he was ever a real artist.
But had I ever any talent? Yes, I did. I had talent. The signs and traces of it are visible in all my old work. But these wretched hands can no longer conjure any kind of real art.
The artist thrust his wretched work to the floor and began to hunt through all his pieces in search of anything at all that pleased him. Anything that showed he had ever been talented. He tore through everything he had painted in the last few years, knowing that each of those works was tarnished with greed and frivolity. He propelled anything displeasing to him across the room, creating a graveyard of scattered canvases strewn across his apartment. He could find no comfort, no proof of his talent, nothing he could consider beautiful. Then, beneath a pile of sketchbooks preserved from his youth, he stumbled across something that made his stomach churn.
Those eyes! Those living human eyes!
It was that remarkable portrait which he had bought all those years ago. All this time it had been covered up, concealed by other pictures, and had utterly gone out of his mind. Now it looked forth, together with the productions of his early youth. As he recalled the strange events connected with it, as he remembered that this singular portrait had been, in a manner, the cause of all his errors, that the hoard of money which he had obtained in such peculiar fashion had given birth, in his mind, to all the wild choices which had destroyed his talent. Madness was on the point of taking possession of him.
I must destroy this hideous thing. I cannot stand to see it.
A horrible envy of all those artists who had stayed true to themselves overcame Tchartkoff. An envy which bordered on madness. He conceived the most devilish plan which ever entered into the mind of man, and he hastened with the strength of madness to carry it out. He began to purchase the best art of every kind for 1,000 miles. Anything he could obtain from the Academy of Art. The most desirable pictures from dealers' private collections, and world-famous masterpieces under the care of curators and museums. Having bought a particularly beautiful picture at a great price, he transported it to his room, flung himself upon it, and with the ferocity of a tiger, cut it, tore it, ripped it to bits, and stamped upon it with a maniacal grin of delight. No monster of ignorance ever destroyed so many superb productions of art as did this raging avenger. Fortunately for the world of art, such a life could not last long. His supernatural passions were too overpowering for his feeble human strength. Attacks of hysteria began to recur more frequently and ended at last in the most frightful illness. The long-forgotten, living eyes of the portrait began to torment him, watching every evil and destructive act he carried out. And it was at this point his insanity became unbearable. At last, his life ended in a final attack of unutterable suffering.
Those eyes! Those living human eyes!
Now, would anybody like to buy a painting?
The story was narrated by Sophie McMahon. Tchartkoff was played by William Males. All other parts were played by Rhys Baker. Original music by Jeff Page.